Welcome to Meditations, a Stoic podcast, a 12-episode limited series exploring the writing of Marcus Aurelius. Through this work, we will examine the philosophy of Stoicism, how it applied to the life of Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome, and how it applies to our own lives today. All right, here we are. I am always, as always, am a guy who is keenly interested in philosophy, so much so that I'm doing an entire podcast about it, and very excited to have all of you here. Maybe excited is the wrong word. It's a Stoic podcast. I'm very calm to have all you guys here listening to the podcast today, and we're going to dig into chapter 4 of Meditations, and I am here with a very fine gentleman who will be helping us on this voyage. Who do we have on the other side of the microphone here?
My name is Devin Kivioya, history fanatic, ordained minister, and pirate. And it is a pleasure and a privilege to be here with you again, Jared.
You're an ordained pirate?
Ordained minister and a pirate, yeah.
Oh, okay.
My brother got married a couple years ago, and we didn't have anybody to do the deed, and so I got a minister's license.
No way.
Yeah, man. I can do weddings, I can do baptisms, I can do funerals, I don't know, like lots of stuff.
That's crazy, man. In which church?
Yeah, I helped my brother get married a little while ago.
In minister?
It's a non-denominational church called the Universal Church of Life.
Okay, cool. It sounds like some weird shit.
It cost $150 on the internet.
Yeah, it seems legit. Seems legit to me. Yeah. So let's just get right into it here. We've got a dense chapter to get through here. Chapter 4. I think it's one of the longer chapters. It might even be the longest one that we've read so far for the podcast.
I think so.
Yeah, and I think that out of all of these chapters, I reread it the most. So it's very forward, very, very forward in my mind right now. And yeah, a little bit heavy,
okay.
But quite a bit to dig into. But I also think that there's going to be a lot of jumping off points here for some really good discussion. As always, before we get deep into that one, we can just talk a little bit of background here. And I think that probably the best thing to talk about is some of the hardships that Marcus Aurelius faced in his life, because that's going to be very important for this chapter.
They really did seem to be unending. I'm looking at the list that you have here, but on top of this, his father died when he was extremely young. And I believe he was raised by his uncle. And his co-emperor was actually, they were pretty close. And I think it deeply affected Marcus when he died as well. Mm-hmm. You add to that the fact that, 9 of his 13 children died in infancy.
I just want to, while you mentioned co-emperor, I just want to point out that we're co-emperors of this podcast.
I like that. Which one of us is the East and which is the West?
Shit. I'm going to say I'm the East.
Oh, okay. I can live with that.
Okay.
And so, there's the Antonine Plague, rebellions on the border and constant warfare, civil war, difficulties in his marriage and his wife dying young. It seemed like it just never ended for Marcus Aurelius. Mm-hmm. The truth is, he happened to exist at a time when the holes in the boat of the Roman Empire were starting to become more than the water that could be bailed out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a fair way of looking at it. Do you know how his kids actually died? I couldn't really find like a concrete...
There's not an incredible amount of detail on it. When we're talking about sources for Roman history, there are not a whole lot of them. And so we are often working with very little. Infant mortality was pretty naturally high back then compared to what we would think of it now. On top of that, you add to that the Antonine Plague, and I have to assume that makes for some of it as well. If 10% of your population is dying. And so I don't have any specifics right now if there are any, but I know that there are not a whole lot of specifics. We might have details on how 1 or 2 of his children died, but not 9 of them.
I did find some stuff saying that it might have had something to do with lead poisoning.
So that's like a general broad theory across the history of the Roman Empire. The Romans built all of their plumbing and aqueducts out of lead. They were completely and entirely aware of the neurotoxic effects of lead, but for the most part, that was isolated to a lower, more disposable class of workers, and they did not see the long-term effects as clearly from people who used the products as they did from people who mined the lead. So while they were aware of this, yes, the Romans did use cups and pipes and aqueducts that were all made out of lead, and so most of them would have spent most of their lives with lead poisoning. And this definitely could have had a hand in the death of some of his children.
Yeah, that makes sense.
This is actually one of Gibbons's kind of longer diatribes about why the Roman Empire ended. He likes to say that lead poisoning and Christianity played a huge part in it, among other things.
Yeah, I'd say that. And a plague that, kills 10 million people would probably also be part of that. Yeah.
Make a big difference. Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm. And any information, like this one is kind of up in the air as well, of how his wife actually died. Is it Faustina? Am I saying it right?
Yeah, Faustina. I can't remember if it's Faustina the Younger. I think so, but
yeah, people
we'll
say
move
that.
Past that. This is quite an interesting story. So when Marcus is on the Danube fighting the Marcomannic coalition for the first time, he got sick. And Rome being the very power fluid kind of place that it was, his wife became very nervous. Their son was extremely young and probably really not strong enough to be seen as a serious contender for empire yet. The idea of an emperor's son becoming the emperor wasn't even necessarily how things were done, so there was no guarantee of that anyways.
Yeah.
When they started to have problems with the Parthians, one of the generals that Marcus dispatched along with his co-emperor to go to Parthia to fight was named Avidius Cassius. Avidius Cassius was extremely successful in the Parthian War, and this made him very popular with his troops and with the people of the Eastern Roman Empire. And Avidius Cassius was very close with Faustina. She wrote him a letter, according to a Roman senator. She wrote him a letter saying that she was afraid for the life of her husband, and if he died, she was afraid for her life and the life of her son. Avidius Cassius took this to mean that she wanted him to rise up in rebellion and take the throne. So his troops declared him emperor, and a civil war ensued. Marcus cuts a deal with the Marcomanni, turns around, goes to Parthia, or he's on his way to Parthia, when Avidius Cassius is beheaded by one of his lieutenants, and the head is presented to Marcus.
I'm going to guess he didn't survive. I'm going to guess he didn't survive that.
Yeah, he did not survive being beheaded. That was entirely fatal. Not even partially fatal, but completely 100% fatal.
Way worse than lead. Way worse than lead, I've heard.
Oh yeah, and a rebellion is a really bad time to lose one's head.
Yeah, that's true. Is there a good time?
I suppose not. If there's somebody around to make sure nothing too bad happens, that would be the best time. Mm-hmm. There are more optimal times,
I guess.
But anyways, the head's presented to Marcus. He refuses to see it. Now, this is where we're going mostly into the supposition of Cassius Dio, who says that Faustina was blamed for this, and it's basically on Cassius Dio's word that we hear about the letter. We do not have a copy of the letter, but according to him, the letter was sent, and there's a very good chance that Marcus may have been forced to have her assassinated. There's a Netflix documentary which depicts this. However, there are also sources that say she died of illness. Yeah. So this is one of those historical maybes, what ifs, one or the others. Personally, I am generally inclined to go with the less sensational possibility. However, the possibility does exist. And here's the thing. We get a lot of our history from this period from Cassius Dio. Also, he was a senator with like a very particular set of interests, and he liked to write histories that were a little bit sensationalist. The Roman concept of history did not involve accurate retellings always. It was more about telling a story which would satisfactorily explain to somebody in a reasonable amount of time how we got to now. It didn't have to be accurate.
Yeah, that makes sense. But all that really to say that, Marcus Aurelius had not a shitty life, but definitely, a tumultuous life, I guess. And, when he talks about things like, the universe kind of giving you these tests and giving you these hardships, and when he talks about, experiencing death and stuff like that, it's not hypothetical for him, right? It was something that was very
real.
Yeah. And he himself eventually succumbed to sickness and an early death himself. So, yeah. So we can move on a little bit, start digging into the text here of Book 4. We usually at the top of these discussions, we like to try to distill the chapter down to kind of a phrase or, just like a key idea. I have one to propose here. You can let me know what you think. I think if you were to sum up Book 4, it would be, it is your soul, not your body, which is most important. That's how I'd put it.
Yeah, I think that would sum it up. If you had asked me before I said that, I probably would have said the life internal is more important than the life external. But I think probably your way sums it up better.
It's the two ways of saying the same thing.
Yeah,
for sure. The kind of overall idea is that you shouldn't let the distractions of the material world keep you from focusing on guarding the purity of your soul. I think that's the best way that I could really explain it. I wrote down here in the notes, beware the flesh and the power it holds. That's a death metal song.
Okay, that's not a quote from the book? Because I was like, I missed that.
No, that's just a death metal song.
But it brings me around to a question, right?
Mm-hmm.
If this guy was so concerned with the purity of his soul, why did he do all the fucking it took to make 13 children?
Because fucking doesn't hurt the purity of your soul.
And I don't know how they saw that. That was how they saw it.
I don't think that they had these weird hang-ups about sex, man.
I very rarely look into ancient societies' attitudes about sex, so you know what? I didn't really know much about it, to be honest.
Yeah, from even just what we've discussed on the podcast, that it was fairly common with philosophers and teachers and stuff that they would fuck their students. I mean, at least in Greece. Maybe by the Roman period this was different, but I really don't they had quite a bit of depictions of nudity and stuff in their art and all these types of things. I just don't think that they were so worried about that type of stuff, like the way that we are kind of sexually stifled or something like that.
That's more kind of Christianity that did that,
I was gonna say, I think it's more of a Christian thing, man. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So I guess they just weren't that worried about it. I would say more like the genocide would be, something that might hurt your soul, doing genocides, right?
Yeah, and I mean, that was how should I say this? While Rome did a lot of things over a long period, which we would now consider to be genocide, I'm not sure that they had a word for it, and I don't really think it was the idea of it being a horrible thing was bad to them. The idea that they would look at a piece of land and say, we will either eliminate or drive out everybody who lives there and replace them.
Mm-hmm.
That was wholly commonplace in their society.
Yeah. And maybe something that they didn't view as immoral for whatever reason.
Not at all. Completely normalized. To them, that was what you do. That's the empire. That's civilization.
Yeah. So, I don't know. When it comes to guarding the purity of your soul, maybe for Marcus Aurelius, that wasn't something that he really thought was hurting his soul, but it's hard to imagine.
Obviously didn't mind having a bunch of people killed.
No, he didn't. Right. So,
Yeah.
I mean, as much as we, even on this podcast, and within like the kind of modern revival of Stoicism, whatever you want to call it, we all kind of praise Marcus Aurelius, and like, let's be honest, like I look up to him in a way, right? That's why we're reading this book. Let's, at least we do have to kind of keep those considerations in our head that, he obviously wasn't perfect. Yeah.
Nobody's perfect, and I think one of my favorite TV shows has a line, every person who ever had a statue made of them was some kind of a son of a bitch in some way.
Yeah, that is very, very true. I'm trying to think of one person. I don't know. I'm sure there's like a statue of like Martin Luther King or something, and you'd have a hard time finding any dirt on that guy, right?
Cheated on his wife.
Yeah, but we're not here to talk about that anyways.
Well, that turned fast.
Jesus. Okay, anyways, let's move on. So I think that it's good to, oftentimes we can get lost in talking about, big quotes and that from the text. But I think it's really helpful just to kind of zero in on certain parts and use that as a discussion. And I think that in section 34 here, when he talks about Clotho, I'd like to get into that a little bit, because I think that it's revealing about, Marcus Aurelius's kind of view of reality, view of the universe, view of like spirituality. But I also think that it reveals a lot about like the Roman society that he lived in, and, comparing it to modern day society. So I would just like to kind of dig in a little bit here. Here in section 34, hand yourself over to Clotho voluntarily and let her spin you into whatever she pleases. So what does that mean to you?
That seems to me to be like understanding what Clotho is. Give yourself up to your fate. Mm-hmm. You can fight your fate, or you can play a willing part in it. Those are your choices. I think that seems to be the worldview here. Yeah.
And for a little bit of background here, it's interesting that he only brings up Clotho, right? So Clotho
doesn't mention the others.
Yeah, Clotho was one of the Moirai, which are the three fates, kind of like the godhead of fate itself, I guess, if you want to look at it that way. I think that they're sisters, I believe. I could be wrong about that. But Clotho,
I believe so.
Clotho, Lachesis, and Atropos. So the spinner, the allotter, and the inevitable. Again, Clotho is like spinning the events of your life or whatever, deciding like who's going to be born. Lachesis is kind of like, I guess,
how much time you have.
Yeah, how much time that you're going to have. And then Atropos is there to represent like death. Yeah, they were collectively responsible for making sure that every living being lived out their fate. And interesting to me that even the gods were subject to their power. Obviously, like the Greek gods didn't die, so that part isn't really relevant. But the rest of it is that they would be deciding what's going to happen, even to the gods, even in their own lives.
I just realized how different that makes this worldview from anything we have in the modern world.
How so?
The idea that there's a power above your god that they are subject to.
Yeah.
I'm not aware of a modern religion outside of, say, maybe Hinduism, which would have such a thing.
I'm reminded of the very, very important kind of thought experiment. Could Jesus microwave a baked potato so hot that he himself could not eat it?
I've never heard this before. Where does this come from?
I didn't make that shit up.
I believe you didn't make it up, but where did it come from?
I don't know. Kind of the idea that, perhaps the gods themselves are subject to some sort of physical laws, right? Like that, that God isn't necessarily above the laws of the universe. I tend to like this idea.
It was either Arthur C. Clarke or Philip K. Dick that said, any technology you can't understand will be indistinguishable from magic.
Mm-hmm.
It was one of those two, a science fiction writer, and I think we can just as easily apply that to the idea of gods. They might not be wholly omnipotent creatures, just higher creatures that we cannot understand.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, and that's why we view them as gods, just because they have so much more power than us. But that doesn't mean that they're more powerful than like the laws of the universe, right? Like,
yeah, exactly. It never occurred to me that way before. I always saw the idea of any god as being outside of the universe.
Yeah. Well,
not subject to its limitations and powers. That's kind of how I see the Christian God, for example.
Yeah, I think that you might be right in that. Like, at least, in how the Christian God is viewed, which, I don't know, to my mind doesn't really make as much sense as this. Like, if you're going to believe in gods, it seems like they would still have to exist within the universe and be subject to
Yeah, it's not like they just kind of like, they would create a thing with laws and stuff like that, or they would be part of it, rather, creating in it.
Yeah, I think
Tolkien has this idea of sub-creators. Tolkien sees God as the creator, but anybody can be a sub-creator in his universe, creating a sub-universe. That was how J.R.R. Tolkien saw what he was doing.
Okay, yeah. And I think that's kind of what, like, humanity might be doing with, like, technology and stuff like that. Like, we might be creating the intelligence that, like, supersedes us, right? So
yeah, that could be it looks like we could be doing that now.
Yeah, that's kind of weird to think about. Anyways, in terms of just like what this means, as I brought up earlier, like about the view of, I guess, like the view of death and the view of fate, and maybe the view of women as well, that the Greeks had compared to us, because any depictions of the fates in like modern pop culture are always like quite hideous.
Grotesque.
Grotesque is a good word for it. I sent you when I was doing my reading here. I ended up looking up Clotho.
A nasty picture.
Yeah, I just wasn't very familiar. Clotho is a character in God of War and like the video game series, and like just horrifying, right? Just like a giant slug woman with like just
a giant slug with like floppy tits.
Yeah, I wasn't gonna say floppy tits, but floppy tits.
I can confirm I've looked at this picture and I will not be having an erection for a while.
Yeah, for sure. No one will. So, yeah, like, why do you think that is? And similarly, the other like really good touch point that you brought up of Hercules, right? Like the cartoon Hercules from the 90s or whatever. Yeah, the fates are
included
in
it
that
as well. They're passing the single eye around between them. Constantly. They have one eyeball and they each take turns with it, but it does include the one that weaves the string and the one that cuts the string. And that is like part of the interaction of Clotho and Lachesis and Atropos is that one weaves the string, one holds it, and one cuts it. Yeah, and you see that very thing in very well referenced in Hercules.
But why so gross, man? Like why? What does it say about us that at the time, like if you go and look up, like actual Greek and Roman depictions of the fates, they're just women. They're just normal women, like even beautiful. Like, so what is up with us? Like, are we so afraid of death? Are we so afraid of fate? Are we so afraid of like powerful women that we need to depict them as like hideous and grotesque?
There's a couple of thoughts in my mind, but when you say it that way, the answer in my head becomes yes, all of the above. The first and foremost thought in my head is that possibly the Christians who would have, say, translated or studied these things, portrayed it that way. Either because it didn't look appealing to them through their own lens or because they didn't want it to look appealing to people. It could be our modern lens on women or on death and on fate. And I mean, as a culture, I would say that our current culture that we live in, and I mean, I can speak to essentially Anglo-Saxon culture because that's what I know.
Yeah.
Is extremely afraid of death, and we view it very, very negatively.
Yeah. Weird.
Yeah, it's extremely weird, especially since it's such a natural and inevitable part of life.
And even a beautiful part of life, because if it wasn't for death, there could be no new life, right? Like if everyone who was ever born still existed on the planet, like we would just be utterly fucked.
Not only that, think about this, okay? So, if you could live forever, what would be the unit value on any piece of your time?
There wouldn't be any.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The only thing that gives our time any meaning is the fact that it's limited and it's short and we don't know when that is.
Yeah.
I don't know when I'm going to die. So every moment that I spend with somebody, it's got to be somebody that I care about, and those moments have to matter because I could get hit by a bus tomorrow and die or whatever.
For sure.
And so these are the things that give the time that we have and the time that we give to each other extremely deep meaning. Death is a very important part of life, and there'd be no point to life without it.
Yeah. And something is deeply wrong with our culture and our society if, we as a group are trying to still resist that. Right? Like,
yeah.
Yeah. And maybe that's...
You might as well try to piss upstream in a river.
Yeah. Or piss into the wind, right? Like,
yeah.
There's many piss analogies that we could use. You're like,
shit leopard can't change its spots. We can go on forever, that sort of thing.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, I just think it's something really, one of the great things that you get from digging into some of this like classic literature, right? Is like this idea that, our modern views of things like as a culture are just skewed in these ways that really don't help us. Like being afraid of death, like it's going to happen whether you're afraid of it or not. And there's nothing that you can do about it. Right. And even trying to meddle with that is not something that's going to have good results. Right. It's like, what's that Stephen King Pet Cemetery, right? You don't want to go down that road. Right.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And more than that, it's something we're all going to have to face someday. So why do we try so hard to run from it? It's like, okay, yes, I am going to die at some point, but also, okay, when two people meet and decide that they like each other enough or grow to care about each other enough that they want to be friends or in a relationship, and they want that to be for an extremely extended or indefinite period of time. When you pick somebody like that, at the end of that road, one of those two people is always going to die. Every time you pick somebody that you love and you care about.
Both of them are going to die.
Yeah, but one of them's going to die first, and the other one's going to be left.
Yeah.
Right?
True. Yeah.
And so this is something we all have to face. One way or the other. Yeah. But instead, we run away to our phones for our dopamine hits.
Yeah, and I'm guilty of that too, man.
Me too. Yeah.
But yeah, I don't want to get... I thought we might like dig into this more. I don't really think it's the time to do it, but I just want to put this quote out here. You guys can chew on it and we'll move on. Something happens to you, good. It was meant for you by nature, woven into the pattern from the beginning. And we'll move on to some more quotes here. Short quotes. I want to just lay them out. Get your translation as well, because the quotes that I have are from my translation, the Gregory Hayes translation here. And they're just very, very short quotes that are packed with a lot to think about, I guess.
Implication.
Yeah. Implication is a good word. At the very, very start of this chapter, he talks about the idea that people always want to get away, right? Like we want to go on vacation. We want to go to the beach or the woods, whatever, right? And he says, you can get away anytime by going within. How's that laid out in your translation? From
For it is in thy power whenever thou shalt choose to retire into thyself.
Yeah.
Essentially the same, just a little bit more Shakespeare-y.
Yeah, a little more Shakespeare-y for sure. Yeah, I like this a lot. Like the idea that you can, like, we all want to escape the kind of day-to-day life, and the hardship, the burden of, I don't know, the burden of being alive, I guess, and that your ability to do that is always there. And you don't need to like do it for a long time. This isn't like the kind of Buddhist meditation idea where you have to meditate your entire life, right? He's not saying that. He's saying you can go for 5-10 minutes, retreat within yourself and find peace there. And I just find this appealing.
I think it's a wonderful idea. I think this is the thing most modern people cannot do here. I know a lot of people, and the idea of stopping anything and going inside themselves for reflection is terrifying and debilitating. I know many people like this.
I don't know how they live.
I can't understand it either. Yeah. I really wasn't living successfully until I learned how to do it.
Yeah. It's really like the thing that can keep you going, I think. Because if you're constantly just doing things, I don't know. It's going to tie into some stuff that we're going to talk about later, I think. So we can move on.
That's what I was doing until I hurt myself. Yeah. Constantly just doing things.
Yeah. I do a lot of that as well. And
yeah.
I don't think it's necessarily the best way to live.
No.
I like this quote here too. While you're alive and able, be good. I'm going to assume that's pretty similar in your translation from section 17.
Yeah, it's extremely close. While thou livest, while it is in thy power, be good. I've personally always said either be good or be good at it. But,
Yeah, be good, morally speaking, right? Like, do good things. And it's like what you were talking about earlier. The thing that makes human life valuable is the supply and demand, right?
Yeah, it's that limitation on time. Exactly. We're never going to have as much as we would like.
Yeah. And you're never going to have the chance to be good again, right? You're only going to get so many chances to enrich the lives of others, take care of your responsibilities. Just be the type of person that other people want to look up to and want to emulate, maybe. Like, this is really the only way that you're going to have any type of longevity in life. And even that's not that important, to be honest. It's just the only way that you're going to have, like, I don't know, you're going to be able to face your death happily.
Is that the idea of good they're talking about, or are they talking about the Stoic concept of, like, that ideal soul?
Is it both? It's tied together, I think.
Okay, I suppose it could be both. Yeah.
Yeah, I think they're tied together. Anything else on that?
No. I think that's pretty thorough.
Okay, we'll go to this next one. I really, really like this one. If you seek tranquility, do less. And then it's kind of expanded upon, do only what is essential, right?
Yeah.
I spend... Oh, we'll get your translation too, section 24.
Occupy thyself with few things, says the philosopher, if thou wouldst be tranquil.
Yeah. I think I do a lot of things in my life that are not essential. I think I spend a lot of time doing pointless shit. And
can you give me an example?
Like you talked about earlier, scrolling around on Instagram.
Okay, fair. No, we're all doing that.
Yeah, because it gives you that like dopamine hit, but it really doesn't. I think I'm starting to realize, like, especially through like doing this podcast, it's really like it forces me to not just read this stuff, right? But to reread it and think about it and dig into it, right? Like focus on certain parts of it and like get way, way, way beneath like the surface level, right?
Yeah. And I'm finding that even though there are a lot of things in Stoicism that I don't find would work for me or I don't identify with it, at its core, it's extremely similar to how I approach the world.
Yeah.
It's not that different from my own personal philosophy. It's just got a couple of things which are vastly different. Yep. And so I'm starting to see more and more how this applies to my life in ways that I kind of already am starting to apply.
Yeah, and I just love this concept, like, do less. Because I feel like so much of the modern world, modern economy, modern society, like, pressures you that you need to be doing more. And there's always, like, that thing that you're not doing that I should be investing in stocks and trading currencies, and I should be doing Twitch streams, and I should be doing this, and I should be doing that. All of this shit, right? That really this idea takes the pressure off, right? If you seek tranquility, do less. Do only what is essential and cut out the inessential things. And that's how you're going to actually, like, live a better life. It's kind of
I was going to say, do you think he means actually spend less time doing things, or do you just think he means reduce the amount of things you devote your time to?
It might be both.
Okay.
Yeah, like, you're obviously, like, he did a lot of stuff, right? He's not the type of not the type of person that
he never
just, like,
stopped,
sat around and played with his wiener or whatever.
No, he spent like 18 straight years on the Danube running a war.
Yeah. So I don't think that he's saying, like, be lazy.
I didn't think so either. I just wanted to flesh it out.
Yeah. Just don't be, I think it's more don't be distracted, right? Like, and don't do things that are random. Like, stop being like that, the dog on Up, right? Whenever it sees, like, a squirrel. There's so many different like cultural touch points in this episode. I love it. Like, so many references. Just be so focused on what you actually want to do that you're not distracted by those things. Yeah.
Direct quote from Marcus Aurelius: "Stop having ADHD."
Yeah. Wow, that's hard for me. It's very hard for me to stop having ADHD. Yeah. And then this one here from section 32. This is the last quote, and these are all very short, and I think we're getting a lot out of them. So this has been a good exercise. You're better off not giving the small things more time than they deserve, right?
Yeah, I hear that a lot.
Yeah. 32, you got that one in your translation?
Yes. For thus thou wilt not be dissatisfied if thou appliest thyself to smaller matters no further than is fit.
Yeah. Very much the same.
Yeah. There was a bit less of a difference in this chapter, I think, between what you read and what I read.
That's cool. I can't come up with any reason why.
I don't know. It may have been a bit more straightforward.
I guess, yeah. Maybe, like, the actual text is just more straightforward. Yeah, that could be true.
In my opinion, it seems to be in this chapter.
Yeah. So small things, disputes with your neighbors, bullshit like that, gossip, right? All of those types of things that kind of distract you from what you really should be focused on, and reminding us here that, these things aren't actually important, and they're not going to make you happier. They're not going to make your life better. And they're not going to serve you, and they're not going to serve anybody else, right?
Yeah,
for sure. All right, so let's get into some questions, critiques, and I'll start with just with Devin. What is something, as you were reading chapter 4 over the last couple of weeks here, that what's something that jumped out to you as, like, well, hold on, like, anything?
I don't know if there was anything that was really like a well hold on in this one. I mean, obviously, you know me, I have difficulty wrapping my mind around concepts when we get out of the physical world and into the more metaphysical one. But But if anything, the thought in my head, and I know this has been very consistent throughout my this being my analysis, but whenever I read this, I can't help but think that a lot of what's being said here is tied to his grief. I don't think that means it's not philosophy. I just think that the grief that he experienced with losing people in his life just highly colored the way that he thought and saw everything. And you know what? I'm willing to admit that maybe there's a bit of projection in that, and that's fine. But that's how it looks to me.
That he, like when he's saying, human life is trivial, don't worry about it, that's less a philosophical statement, like less like epistemology or whatever you want to call it, and more just like, I think you used the word coping, right?
Yeah, coping would be the word that I use. And like, does Marcus Aurelius use the word trivial?
In my translation, he does, yeah.
I would say that when he says human life is trivial, he's not referring to the value of an individual human life, more the idea of like participation in the real versus the spiritual. Would you agree?
All human life is trivial because it's so short, like from a historical and like the perspective of like time itself, right? It is very trivial. You're just one small person in a small society, on a small planet, in a small galaxy, right? In terms of the bigger picture. Nothing is
and
important.
I see your point.
Mm-hmm.
However, this is where maybe I have to do a little bit of disagreeing with you.
Mm-hmm, that's fine.
And this is one of those things where I might have to take a deep breath and go off into a bit of a tangent.
Go ahead. I've been talking a lot.
Here we go. So, billions of years ago, a whole bunch of atoms get spread out across the galaxy. They form slowly and coalesce into larger objects. Eventually, those large objects reach the point where they are able to ignite into chain fusion and start to create more complicated atoms. At that point, other objects start to form around those objects too. Some of those objects just happen to be in the very finite zone where those rocks might be able to have liquid water. This is extremely rare. The idea of those rocks also being in a place where the temperature is just right for lots of plants to be able to live. Wow, that's super rare too. This whole thing goes on and on and on till we reach the point where we're at this point now. And here is a collection of billions of atoms called Jared Poirier. And all of these atoms had to be in the right place at the right time to be together. And all of these things had to just come together perfectly to form you. And you have the audacity to say that your life is not special, that it's inconsequential, that it doesn't mean anything? Come on.
I really don't think so, man. I think that like had those atoms coalesced in a different way, it would be just as meaningless in the grand scheme of things, man. I honestly do believe that. There's a really good there's good images, kind of like analogies that Marcus Aurelius uses in this chapter. That idea of like the visual of the tapestry of life, right? Like I like that a lot. But there's another one that I think is so important to focus on here, which is basically the idea that like we're a bunch of incense on an altar, right? All burning. What difference does it make if you're the piece of incense that burns first or last?
Absolutely none. Matters how I burn in between.
Yeah. But is any of it truly important from the big picture perspective? If you look at like the totality of the history of the universe, can you really say that your life is important?
Maybe it is, maybe it's not.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess you don't know.
Yeah, that's the thing, you don't know. And for all you know, all our life is only determined like entirely by the movements of stars and molecules and atoms. And maybe that like takes away from its importance, or maybe it just makes us another important part in the sequence of events that's going along. And you know, maybe whether or not it looks like it, we're just one cog in a wheel of important things that are happening one after another. Personally, I'm a little more on the side of things are random and shit just happens. Yeah. But how do we know?
Yeah, it does seem that way. I think you're starting to narrow in on what I think he's trying to get at here, though, is that the way that you can be, like the way that your life can have significance is if you integrate yourself with what like is called the logos, right? Which I initially thought was like, you know, in like the Greek tradition of the logos, kind of like the idea that we talked about in previous episodes, like collective human consciousness. Yeah. Right? The way it's used here, though, it kind of seems to be more like, I don't know, like the essence from which like all life derives its lifeliness or whatever, right? Like, the idea of like a god above all other gods, right? Like going back to that whole idea of like Platonic idealism that we talked about, right? Like the source of godliness, that like even the gods derive their godliness from, right? To the degree that you can submit to that and really like steer your life, steer your actions in accordance with the logos, I think that's where your life does have value, where your life is important. And let's like be clear here. Marcus Aurelius, he never wanted immortality, right? He talks in this chapter sprinting towards the finish line, right?
Yeah.
And yet here we are 2,000 years, whatever later, right? Still talking about him. Not because he was a great emperor. We know that he wasn't that great, right? I mean, he fucked up a lot of stuff. He died young, and he left an idiot in charge.
Yeah, and I would say succession was the primary job of a Roman emperor. To find somebody who would do a good job after you were gone. He failed in this task monumentally.
Failed in that, but why do we still remember him, and why do we still care about his life? Why are we still talking about him? Why did we do an entire podcast about this and devote countless hours, right?
Because he wrote quotes that 14-year-old girls can put on their wall.
Yeah, and that's about the level of intelligence that you and I have. So,
I'm just messing with you.
Yeah, right.
No, because these things ring true for people.
They ring true, and they're part of like a deeper truth that kind of transcends all the bullshit, right?
I think the deeper truths in humanity are very deeply tied to the more universal parts of our experience.
Yeah.
Birth, death, loss, eating, all the things that we all share in common across cultural lines. Those are the things that speak to the deeper truth of the meaning of human life.
Mm-hmm.
Not the meaning of an individual life, but of all lives.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think when he talks about like, things that happen being like neither good nor bad, and, this idea that like, it doesn't really like your life doesn't really matter. I don't think that this is purely like moral relativism or nihilism. I think it's just like what we were just talking about, right? That there is like,
Sorry, continue.
Oh, that there's just like a deeper truth, like a deeper like sense of good in the universe that we can align ourselves with, right?
I see elements of moral relativism laid into it.
Yeah.
And I think that moral relativism would be required of a Roman emperor. I don't see it as a failing.
Mm-hmm. Is it required
However,
of a Stoic philosopher or a student of Stoicism?
I think philosophy requires some element of moral relativism. You need to be able to step out of a completely objective idea of morality to be able to turn it around in your hands and examine it openly and kind of in a way which I would call scientific, which is kind of just open to those new possibilities.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep. And yet there's still this concept that like runs through this entire thing of, keeping your soul pure and being a good person, living a good, virtuous life, right? That like, never like these ideas that, sure, morality is relative and stuff, like never transcends, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I'm not sure I've noticed him being specific about what his idea of that kind of morality is. I know that there's a little bit of it flashed in there, but it's not as important as some of the other things going on. He just happens to mention it.
Yeah, maybe
he says to live a good life, doesn't say what the good life is.
Yeah. Yeah, and maybe we will, as we like read a little bit deeper into this, then we might arrive at that. By the end, we might arrive at that. I also think that it's interesting too, and then we'll get into just like how we can apply this to our lives, and then we'll give you some homework. But we've talked a lot about the like Greco-Roman concept of the afterlife. Did they believe in like a heaven or hell kind of idea, and specifically like Marcus Aurelius, like what did he believe? Did he believe in reincarnation? Blah, blah, blah. This is interesting here. I think it really sheds some light on that. Just his personal view, or kind of like taking, like the Greek tradition, the Roman tradition, distilling it down. He says, what happens to all of the souls, right, that have ever existed? They linger for whatever amount of time, and then through change and decomposition, make room for others. What does that mean to you in terms of like, what is the afterlife?
What I can say is that it seems to me that by Marcus Aurelius's time, they'd gotten pretty far from the original Greek idea of the afterlife. And they may have been coming closer to a more Christian one. And I think I might see flashes of that here. Other than that, the other thought in my head is that it's almost like a reflection of the afterlife, or rather that the afterlife is very much a reflection of real life. And that you're going to go there, live there for a while, and eventually you'll be gone there too.
Yeah, like just as the bodies like in the ground have to decompose, and
so do souls.
Yeah, and this idea of like change, which really comes through in this chapter, like it's brought up quite a few times. That like the one thing that nature loves more than anything else is change. Like nature loves to take stuff and like reconstitute, reorient it into something else.
I like to say that all life is in motion.
Yeah. And just as you were saying earlier, right? Like the very atoms in your body, the very air in your lungs, it's all recycled, right?
Yeah. And it all came from somewhere that it was doing something else before this. Yeah.
Which can be either like really, really, like it can make you feel really important if the atoms that are in you were like once in the sun, but also like the atoms that are in you were like once like a deer turd, right? It's both things.
I'm just
are true.
really hoping that the air in my lungs wasn't in somebody's butt recently.
It's really all that we can hope for in life, Devin.
I don't have very complex wants in life.
Yeah, I don't know.
But to not breathe farts, that's one of them.
I guess, man. I don't know. Some people are into that. Some people pay extra for that.
I've heard that some people fart into cakes.
Okay. Anyways. That's probably a good sign that it's time to move on to our penultimate section, where we do the very, I don't know, like the mission statement of this podcast, right? The whole point of doing all this stuff isn't to talk about Greek goddesses and muse about all this, the afterlife and blah, blah, blah. none of it's important unless we can apply it to our own lives. So these are a few things that a few questions that I've asked myself this week. I could just put it that way. And maybe we can answer these, and if it's too personal, we don't have to. You can that's good. Yeah, we can let the listeners answer these questions for themselves. Is there anything random, trivial, or unnecessary that you do? Is there?
I think I'm going to be straightforward here. Ever since my injury, since my means have been limited, I don't always have the means to do a lot of unnecessary things. But I want to focus in on the time that I spend on my phone when I have free time. And I'm just going to go straight for the answer here. I'm pretty sure if I stopped, I'd feel a lot better.
Yeah, I agree with that, man. Like, I think that probably the biggest time-wasting thing that I do is, like, scrolling on Instagram and watching random videos on YouTube. And if I stopped doing these things, I would probably be happier, yeah.
And may I ask you a question about it?
Yeah, go ahead.
Why do you do it?
I'd like to blame my attention deficit disorder. I think it's a way of distracting myself from my responsibilities.
That's one way of looking at it. I've always seen it as a way to avoid my feelings. Not in an active way. Like, I don't pick up my phone and think I'm going to avoid my feelings. But whenever I look back on it, after having just done it, I think to myself, man, you know what happened there? I was not really feeling good for maybe 5 minutes, and I went straight into the trap.
Yeah, agreed. And then you're scrolling through, and you're like very much so turning your mind off, but not in like meditation kind of turns your mind off.
But this isn't that kind of way, and it isn't positive either.
No,
necessarily.
No, not really. So I don't know. Something to work on potentially. If you want to, who cares if you don't? This one I want to get into here. Are you holding on to any resentment, preoccupation, or worry that keeps you from living in the moment?
That's a tough one. Resentment is the thing that I've been working on. So I think I can proudly say that while it exists, it's about at as a pretty high minimum, or rather like the most minimum it's ever been.
That's good.
I would say that though preoccupy and worry tend to follow me around. As somebody who has experienced a few deaths, I do find myself extremely preoccupied with the deaths of people around me. I'm constantly worrying. What if my brother died? What if Jared died? What if my dog died? What if I open the door right now and my dog runs out into the street and gets crushed by an asteroid?
Yeah. What difference does it make, though? Worrying about it.
It would make a difference. Yeah, so that's the thing, right? The worrying doesn't help, but it's definitely something that's gotten out of hand that I have to get my mind around.
Yeah, me too, man. I think that's just part of, like, being human in a way. And maybe it has, like, I don't know, you could really go off the rails with this if you wanted to. I'm sure it has some kind of, like, evolutionary reason. Like, at some point in, like, our history as a species or whatever, like when we were Neanderthals or something, you would have to, like, think about all these things and be worried that, you know, this guy's going to come club you in the head, and think about all of these, like, possibilities and that. But these days, yeah, it just really doesn't help you. Like,
it can, but no, it mostly does not.
And this idea of resentment, going back to, you know, these, like, really nice kind of visual ideas that are in here, these, like, analogies. He says something like, why are you getting upset at, like, certain types of people? You might as well get upset at, like, a fig tree for making figs, right? Like, people are who they are. If they're malicious, that's who they are. So in the same way, like, you're not going to get mad at a dog for licking its nuts, right? Like, like, you might as well accept it.
But if there are people out there who make the choice to change and be better people and succeed at it, then that's proof that anybody could choose to do it, and some people just don't.
I guess, man, but I feel like some people are just like, they are just shitty. Like, and
That's fair.
yeah, it's just who they are. It's just who they are.
Do you think that's a majority of people?
No, I don't. I honestly don't. But I think that they don't, and that's the thing. No one thinks that they're a shitty person, right? Everyone justifies themselves, right? But just any like trait that you might find repugnant, like just people who are selfish or people who gossip a lot, right? Realize that that's just like who they are, and that getting upset about that, like, again, you might as well get upset at, a duck for quacking, This
is why I'm so selective about who I will have in my closer circles.
Yeah.
Because like I don't want to spend my time reminding myself not to be annoyed at careless people. Mm-hmm. I'll just avoid having careless people around.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. Yeah. And the subsequent question here is, can you let these things go? These resentments, preoccupations, worry, can you let it go? I think it's hard to let it go because I do believe that it is kind of like hardwired into us in some ways.
These are survival instincts.
Yeah. But do they really serve you, and could you potentially let them go? I think if you try, I think it takes very deliberate work.
Yeah.
Yeah. For sure. And then finally here, and then we'll give you guys some homework, drop a quote on you, and we can go out into the world and try to apply some of this shit. Do you constantly remind yourself of the guiding principles behind your life?
This is something I have to think about. In a way, yeah, I think so. I mean, like, my view of the world was never inherent or internal. I took it in from places and from things, and from stuff that I read. It's the way I see the world is a very complex accumulation of a whole bunch of outside things. And so sometimes I need to go back to those outside things to be reminded of what's important to me. When I don't know what to do in a situation, do you want to know what I do?
What?
I go find the Star Trek episode that's the closest to my situation, and I go watch it, and I see what they did.
I think that's good. Yeah.
It's not the worst way to live your life.
No, definitely, man. A lot of wisdom there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say that a lot of my life I didn't. I think that this reading of meditations and this podcast is really helping me with that. Helping me to first of all figure out the things in my life that are the most important, and figure out like what principles do guide my life. And then also to like constantly remind myself of that. Because as we've talked about here, it seems like your brain, like, and I don't mean yours, I mean like everyone's, right? Like, are just made in a way that like don't really align all the time with like living a full and fulfilling life. Like our brains kind of want something else other than that. And that like to actually achieve that, like you said, takes real work, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes total sense.
Yeah, for sure. So, whatever it is that that reminds you of that, whether it's, philosophy, whether it's Star Trek, both equally valid ways of doing it, in my opinion, right? But make sure that you do.
With a wry smile.
No, it's an audio medium. Yeah. However you do that, make sure that you do it. All right, you ready to give these guys some homework?
Yeah.
All right, drop it on them.
Well, this week, if you can, forgive somebody. Jared, I forgive you.
I forgive you, Devin. I don't know what I have to forgive you for, but
I don't know. I'm sure I've done something to you.
It's just too many fart jokes this week. Too many.
There was like 2 fart jokes. Fuck off.
Yeah, I know. It's fine. Okay, let's end it with a quote. Do you want to do that? Do you want to do the quote this week?
Yeah, sure.
Cool.
Every day and night, keep thoughts like these at hand. Write them, read them aloud, talk to yourself and others about them. Epictetus.